$4 trillion annually. Where's that money going? Is it going towards providing primary care and specialty care and geriatric care, maternal health care for everyone?
I know.
Or does it go to line the pockets of insurance executives,
Corporations,
pharmaceutical companies, and private equity firms? And we say, or at least we have folks who say, that it boils down to we just need to get more Democrats in office. We do that, we back the Republicans, all of our issues will be solved. We just heard Erica Ferriston talk about how here in California we have a Democratic supermajority in our state legislature. Yet we can't even pass health care for all Californians. A bill pulled at the last second, not because there wasn't support for it, but because corporatists were protecting corporatists. They were worried about those max checks, denying their ability to be reelected and stay in office, because at the end of the day, the focus is on entrenching your own power, not delivering on the platform you actually campaigned on. And as someone who used to work on Capitol Hill, legislative director for the only national indigenous healthcare nonprofit, we were fighting to ensure the federal government honors its treaty obligation to tribal nations. Every ounce of wealth this country has generated has been on the backs, on the resources, the waterways, the rights of indigenous peoples. Stolen land with stolen bodies. That's what built America. All these treaties and never treated right. That is the reality we live in here today. And despite all of that, the advocacy that we achieved, canceling copays and deductibles for our Native veterans, guaranteeing long-term funding for our community health centers, being able to invest a historic $10 billion in our tribal communities to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Believe it or not, the first time in U.S. history that during a public health crisis, we actually bailed out indigenous communities. Even during H1N1, during the Obama administration, and the Spanish flu pandemic a century prior, Native communities had death rates 4 times the general population. We sent them body bags. Not vaccines, not physicians, not nurses, not resources, but body bags. So I'm proud of what we achieved, but it's through that work at the national level that I saw firsthand, experienced firsthand, how we always settle for just tinkering around the edges. Incremental steps, because we can't be too bold. We're worried about the next midterm election. We're worried it might isolate the obstructionists in our own ranks, just to be able to keep that majority. Well, what good is that majority if it's not delivering for the very people who put you in office? What good is campaigning on Medicare for all? What good is campaigning on affordable housing? What good is campaigning on a Green New Deal if the second you get there you say, well, this is the reality in front of us. Look, we all recognize that negotiations happen. We all recognize that we live in a system with 535 people in Congress, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. And they all got to agree on the same language before it passes and goes to the president's desk. But you know one thing you are in control of? Advocacy. Right. And actually pushing and getting and galvanizing your community and reaching out and holding corporatists accountable. You know, when I was on the Hill, we were working on reauthorization of diabetes prevention programs, programs for HIV prevention, and for our community health centers. Collectively, all of our programs combined were about $6 billion. A rounding error in the federal budget, literally a rounding error. And we were working with one of the most powerful committees in Congress, and we had organized meetings where tribal leaders, faith leaders, nonprofit leaders were pushing their member of Congress. We need you to vote on reauthorization of these programs. We need you to fully fund them. Let's get it done. We are on our last breath with these programs. We've got local newspapers to also publish articles holding their electeds accountable. And we got letters to Democratic and Republican leadership that had 70% of the House of Representatives sign on to. You don't see that level of work anymore. Yet the chair and ranking member of this committee still had the audacity to call us in to a closed-door meeting and say, y'all aren't advocating hard enough. We're not hearing enough from any of you. Now, just as a little bit of procedure to provide some more context, the programs we were fighting to reauthorize, the funding to reauthorize our programs were derived from Congress enacting a legislative fix on surprise medical billing. You know that egregious practice where you try to be really good about going to your in-network provider or hospital, but God forbid you have a medical emergency, or you break your hip, or you have a car accident, and you're at the hospital, and unbeknownst to you, you're seen by an anesthesiologist or a lab technician that's not in your network, and 3 months later you're slapped with a $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 bill. Yeah, that's the problem Congress is trying to fix. Everyone could agree that the patient should be held harmless. No one could agree on who should foot the bill. Why? Because you had behemoths on either side arguing for outcomes that only benefited their bottom line. You had the private equity lobby and the hospital lobby on one hand, and the insurance and physician lobby on the other. Who was stuck in the middle? Us. All of us. And in that moment, in that fight, they said we were not advocating hard enough. When I could look at them and say, you're financed by private equity and you're financed by the insurance industry, and that is who is dictating the rhetoric coming out of your mouth right now. That is an egregious failure to actually be there to serve the very people who put you in office. Let's think about the moment that we're in. Where 8 out of 10 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Where rent is unaffordable anywhere in America if you're living on minimum wage. Where here in California, we can't even have a residential buffer zone between a fossil fuel site and someone's home. So you have countless black and brown communities breathing in noxious chemicals day in and day out, impacting everything from their healthcare outcomes, to their educational outcomes, to their economic outcomes. We live here in Los Angeles, ground zero for our houselessness crisis, where we have a minimum over 66,000 unhoused Angelenos in the county, a minimum 44,000 unhoused in the city. We have up to 1.5 million Americans across the country who are living in poverty, living on the streets, living in their cars. We could eradicate houselessness with just 10% of the Pentagon budget. You want to tell me poverty is not a policy choice? We spend close to, taxpayers, all of us, spend close to around $5,000 per person per year that are unhoused. Where's the lion's share of that money going?
Corporations.
It's going to jails.
Yeah.
It's going to law enforcement. It's going to detention centers. It's not going to permanent housing.
No.
The only housing it goes to are congregate shelters that deny people their humanity, that don't provide people services, and that perpetuate that cycle of not actually having a permanent roof over your heads. We spend close to the amount it would take to eradicate houselessness on criminalizing it. And we have ordinances here locally that are unconstitutional, and that all they do is enforce banishment. Say, let's move you from Sherman Oaks to Winnetka, from Winnetka to Granada Hills, from Granada Hills to Brentwood, just perpetuating the trauma of living in poverty. Well, we could eradicate it by building housing. That's how we solve these crises. But when you look at our housing programs at the federal level, nearly all of them have lost funding when adjusted for inflation. You think the military's lost funding when adjusted for inflation?
No.
They're gone the other way.
Yeah.
That's what policy violence looks like to me. Where we always have money for war, but never money for actual communities. And it's the same policy violence at the federal level is happening here at the local level. We have a city that is perfectly fine to spend 1/3 of its budget on the LAPD. To put that into further context, Ukraine, that is currently battling an imperialist war of aggression from someone like Putin. Ukraine's entire military budget is $1.6 billion. LAPD's budget is $3.078 billion. Is there any possible justification for the city of Los Angeles spending twice as much money on policing here than the entire nation of Ukraine spends on its armed forces? No. The answer is no. But what we have to recognize is it's the same beating heart of oppression that says we're okay to subjugate based on your zip code, based on the color of your skin, based on your immigration status, based on your healthcare status, based on your disability status. based on your sexual orientation, your gender identity. We're totally fine to oppress based on those items. But we never actually want to invest in creating a society that protects and empowers all of us. Poverty is a policy choice. And we have little time left when it comes to something like preventing climate catastrophe. You know, as a new father, I gotta say, I've always been a climate activist, but the level of urgency that's been instilled in me, becoming a new father and knowing that with a 10-month-old, soon-to-be 10-month-old son, you know, the IPCC reports cannot put it in starker terms. Climate change is here to stay. It's only going to get worse. And we have a small window of time left to fully decarbonize our economy, reject all fossil fuels, including natural gas. And it's nothing natural about natural gas whatsoever. Including nuclear. Because our district, that's one of the sites of one of the worst nuclear disasters in U.S. history, we know nuclear is not safe. And knowing what's happening in Ukraine right now with the Russian army literally shooting at those same nuclear power plants that are providing energy to Ukrainians, we're one accident away from a nuclear winter where we cannot recover from. Now is not the time for more militarism. Now is the time to invest in living wage union-backed jobs through a Green New Deal. And there are multiple pieces of legislation to actually enact that vision. The Green New Deal for public housing, for public schools, the Fossil-Free Finance Act, the Climate Emergency Act, and so many more. Those are the things that invest in us, in our future, and actually ensuring we have a strong economy, and actually ensuring we have a strong national security. Not sending billions and billions and billions to an apartheid government. Not sending billions and billions and billions to a nation that is waging genocide on the many people. It is the height of hypocrisy for us to stand here and say that we are fighting to defend the human rights of the Ukrainian people. Yet what do we do? Reimpose sanctions on Yemen so we could try to entice the Saudi regime to increase oil production. How is that the moral standing that we think is going to lead to a more prosperous America and a more prosperous state for us in the international globe? It's not the way it works. We lead by example. And our examples have been coups. Our examples have been invasions. Our examples have been occupying forces for decades and decades and decades. And that same lineage is what brought me to stand here before all of you. And it will end with our generation. Because we do not have time for more incrementalism. We don't have time for more band-aids on bullet wounds. We only have time for bold, unapologetic progressive action. That's the work that I've been doing my entire life. And that's the work that we must commit to achieving at the national level if we are to save our democracy and what little is left of it. The urgency is real. And what I fear is that without, look, we all know we need an inside-outside game. I will be the first to tell you that electoral politics is not the be-all, end-all. As an organizer myself, I know that always being able to do mutual aid work, hold our folks accountable, engage in protests, in sit-ins, all of that work must be hand in glove with electoral strategy to get each and every single corporatist permanently out of office. And to build that solidarity, build that camaraderie across all sectors of government, federal, state, and local. Because when we're talking about implementing Medicare for all, it's going to require that coordination. We're talking about implementing climate justice and a Green New Deal, same thing. Housing for all, same thing. And we have such an incredible opportunity in this cycle here in Los Angeles to enact bold structural change. And that's what keeps me going. It's the work that you all are doing in your communities, to hold our politicians accountable, to build for a better future within our own backyards. That's how we achieve justice. By talking to people around us and saying, enough is enough. Let's work hand in glove to finally establish a democracy of the working class. You know, one of my muses, one of the civil rights leaders that has always informed my advocacy, my philosophy, James Baldwin. Woo!
Oh, yeah.
He said, I love America more than any other country in the world. And it is exactly for this reason that I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. That is the moral compass that guides our vision, our advocacy, our work. And so here today, I want to thank you all for everything you've done. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here before you. And I look forward to any questions you may have about our candidacy. Thank you all so much.